3 days?
Yes, sir, 3 days a week, and I have to do this COVID ward duty also on Saturday.
Oh my God.
So we have to see the patients. We have to treat the patients uh,
Yeah,
once a week.
try to be safe.
Yes, sir.
So before your Madhya Pradesh break, do you think we'll be able to finish hemodynamics?
I will try to, sir. I will try to.
If you are free next week, we can take 2 classes and finish it up.
Yes, I
Then we
will.
can take then we can take the break for pujas and then resume
And
after
next
pujas.
next week we have our cytology conference also on
Oh
17th
yeah,
Saturday.
17th. Yeah, right.
So I have a talk in the symposium as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Fine. We'll take it up. Aram se, no problem.
right.
So we'll start.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon session of Pursue General Pathology. And today we have Pursue 5K. This is the 11th lecture in General Pathology. And we are streaming live from Kolkata. And with us we have Dr. Major Palash Kumar Mandal, who is an associate professor in pathology in Sagore Dutta Medical College, Kolkata, and also the lab director for Desun Hospital and Heart Institute, Kolkata. And he has been taking these general pathology classes, and today the topic is hemodynamic disorders, in which he shall be covering edema, embolism, infarction, and shock. This is the first session of hemodynamic disorders. We may have 3 or maybe 4 sessions of that. So before I ask Dr. Mandal to take over, let me request all of you, please keep your mic muted. Please don't share your screen, and please keep your camera off. With that, let me request Dr. Mandal, sir, please take over and please share your screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I can see your screen coming. Yeah. Yeah, fine. Please start. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we will be discussing today. We will be actually there has been a little change in the topics. Initially, it was I thought I will start with embolism, infarction, and edema, but I thought before embolism I should start thrombosis. So that's why this topic I have included thrombosis in today's topic. So we will begin with thrombosis because thrombosis is the primary factor leading to embolism. Embolism leads to infarction. Edema is a separate topic, but we will club together and see how far we progress. If we are short of time, then we will discuss edema in the next class. Every day there is some hitch at this point. I don't know why. To begin with, this is our very old and well recognized picture of the coagulation cascade. You see, we have studied coagulation cascade in class 11 or 12. We have studied in the physiology and we are studying in pathology as well. So I won't discuss the intrinsic and extrinsic pathway because we have discussed it before in various other topics. I have not discussed. Some others teachers may have discussed. So we are assuming that you know the topic. So based on this, we will go to our next. That is what briefly we will just have a very brief discussion about normal hemostasis, because without understanding hemostasis we actually cannot go to thrombosis. So what is normal hemostasis? Hemostasis, as you know, is different from homeostasis. So hemostasis means the stoppage of blood. So whenever there is an injury to the blood vessel, the blood oozes out, and the primary mechanism by which the blood is stopped is called hemostasis. So we have these two intrinsic and extrinsic pathway. Actually, these are for in vitro conditions. That is, when we do a laboratory experiment and we compare the various factors, we try to find out the deficiencies of various factors. For our convenience, we have divided into this extrinsic pathway and our intrinsic pathway. Actually, in the body, they function together. There is no separate pathway, and it is this togetherness that makes the whole thing either easy or even complex at times. Okay, so the ultimate aim of this whole pathway is to form a blood clot, that is the fibrin. The stabilized fibrin is the actual blood clot, and which is the beginning of this hemostasis is with the brief arteriolar constriction. There is a brief constriction. Basically, whenever there is an injury to the blood vessel tries to contract. Okay, this is primarily due to the reflex neurogenic mechanism, and also due to secretion of certain factors like endothelin. Endothelin is secreted from the endothelium cell, as the name applies, and this, however, is a very transient thing, because had it been so, this vasoconstriction would have been sufficient to stop the blood, which is actually not the case. So there are some other factors also. There is a different mechanism altogether which helps to stop the blood flow, and that mechanism is known as hemostasis. So once there is an injury, the lining of the blood vessel, that is the endothelial cells, they are exposed. There is a damage to the endothelial cell, and that exposes the subendothelial extracellular matrix known as the ECM, which is the first event in starting the hemostasis. That first event is the exposure of the subendothelial extracellular matrix, ECM, and that is the exposure leads to the adherence of platelets. The platelets are normally in the blood, they are flowing in the blood, and once this is exposed, the platelets, they come and adhere to the site where there has been some injury. Okay, they come and stick together. Okay, so that is the first action after the vasoconstriction. The first action in the true hemostasis is the first the adherence of the platelets. And not only adherence, the platelets, once they are adhered, they are activated as well. Okay, so this activation of platelet is also very important. Why? Because normally the platelets, they have a round shape. Okay, they have a spherical shape, while after activation they change their shape and become flattened. Okay, initially they're small, spherical, but once they change, they are activated, they become flattened. Why flattened? Because that gives an additional surface area. Why surface area is important? Because that surface area is the base on which the actual platelet plug will form, and on which the secondary plug known as the fibrin plug will form. So that is the base, scaffold. Okay, so platelets have to be activated, they need to change their shape, and in the process of activation also they release some granules. You know, the platelets, they have granules, the alpha granules, the delta granules. So these granules, they contain lot of lot of substances, and these secretions, they also help in recruitment of more platelets. So platelet plugging is very important, and that plug, though it is not a very stable plug, but still it's very important, because this is the first plug which is formed in the process of hemostasis and known as primary hemostasis. Okay, I think you are all versed with all these things, but still, to begin a topic, I need to go through this little bit. I won't go into discussion of intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway, just to give you a bit of it. Okay, so now tissue factor, that is also known as factor 3 or thromboplastin, which is a procoagulant, which is a glycoprotein and synthesized by the endothelial cells. This particular factor is also exposed. Okay, you see, if you see that picture, here we see tissue factor comes only in the extrinsic pathway. But you see, I told you, in vivo, that is inside our body, this distinction does not prevail. So whenever there is an injury, the both the factors may come into play, but actually tissue factor, which is more important for in vivo pathway, is exposed, and that exposure, with the help of some other factor, that is factor 7, initiates the in vivo coagulation cascade. And this, you see, this is factor 7. Factor 7 comes, and with factor this tissue factor, that is factor 3, forms the activated tissue factor. Okay, so now this activated tissue factor helps to, what does it do? It activates factor 10. Factor 10 then is activated with the help of calcium to become factor 10A. Okay, so this is the extrinsic pathway and very important for our inside the body or in vivo mechanism of hemostasis. Fine. Now this factor 7, factor 10 then helps in the formation of thrombin from prothrombin. There are other cofactors also. Calcium is there, factor 5A is there, and this prothrombin, which is there inside the blood, gets converted into thrombin, and this thrombin helps to cleave the fibrinogen, which is again a protein which is inside the plasma, and converts it into insoluble fibrin. So fibrinogen, which was a circulating protein inside the plasma, and that became converted into insoluble fibrin, that is called secondary hemostasis. Okay, so secondary hemostasis is basically a formation of insoluble fibrin, and then that insoluble fibrin becomes more stable by factor 13A, and that is the clot stabilizing factor. Okay, so that becomes a stable fibrin plug and also known as secondary and final hemostasis. There are some counter regulatory mechanisms, as I have told you repeatedly, that the body has a balance in everything. You cannot let that balance deviate. Okay, so balance cannot be tilted to one side. If it tilts, the body tries to immediately tilt the other side of the balance. Okay, so here also there is a counter regulatory mechanism, and that clot which has formed inside the blood vessel needs to be broken after some time, because otherwise there will be no flow of blood. We do not want that, isn't it? So to again make the flowing of blood possible, that particular clot has to be broken down, and that function is done by tissue plasminogen activator, that is TPA, and that is a different mechanism. Again, I am not going into the details. So basically you have to remember, there is a hemostasis, there is a counter regulatory mechanism, that is fibrinolysis. Am I clear? Fine. Coming to endothelium, see endothelium, which is the lining of the inner lining of the blood vessel, and they are lined by the cells known as the endothelial cells. They are very, very important, and they are the key players in the regulation of hemostasis. They maintain a balance. As I told you, they maintain a balance between the prothrombotic, that is the coagulation activity, and antithrombotic activities also. So under the normal condition where there has been no injury, when the blood vessel is completely intact, the endothelial cells, they actually exhibit antiplatelet, anticoagulant activity. So they are antiplatelet. Why antiplatelet? If platelet come, then there will be formation of a clot. The primary hemostasis, what we were discussing. So we do not want any hemostasis inside the flowing blood, in the blood vessel where blood is flowing normally, isn't it? So there is the endothelial cells. They themselves do not want the platelet to come near to them. So they shoo away the platelets. Okay. So they are antiplatelet. Normal condition. They have also anticoagulant effect. So they produce certain molecules like thrombomodulin, which are heparin-like molecules, and they also do have fibrinolytic activity by tissue plasminogen activator. So all these are basically anticoagulant activities. Means they do not allow coagulation. They do not allow coagulation. That is the normal function of the endothelial cells. However, after some injury, the action becomes reversed. The action of the endothelial cells become reversed, and they acquire procoagulant activities with the help of some other factors, that is von Willebrand factor, tissue factor. Tissue factor is the factor 3, as we have already discussed, and von Willebrand factor also resides inside the endothelial cells, and that is very, very important for the attraction and adherence of platelets. So von Willebrand factor is very important and is also a procoagulant because it attracts, and it is very important for the adherence of platelets and for the formation of primary platelet plug. Okay, so endothelial cell, which was normally anticoagulant in its function, becomes procoagulant after some injury. So is always direct injury responsible for this? No. So endothelium can also be injured by various other things. What are the other things? They can be infectious agents like virus, bacteria, anything. They can be hemodynamic forces. Like suppose in a particular place, the blood flow becomes more. Okay, the blood flow becomes more. Why the blood flow becomes more? Suppose there is a hypertension. So in hypertensive condition, the flow of the blood will be more, or the lumen of the artery will be narrowed down, and the hemodynamic force acting on that particular area becomes more. Okay, so hypertensive condition leads to increased hemodynamic force in a particular blood vessel. Okay, and also certain conditions like in heart, we know there are conditions like aortic regurgitation, mitral regurgitation. So all these regurgitations lead to alteration of hemodynamic forces. So this alteration of hemodynamic forces can exert a negative effect on the endothelium. Okay, and that in negative effect is nothing but an injurious force on the endothelium, which changes the anticoagulant activity into a procoagulant activity. Okay, please try to understand. These are all available in the books, and nothing I have this is not my own thought process. These are all given in the books, but I want you to have a basic understanding why we are discussing some things like endothelial cells. Why we are discussing this? Because this is very, very vital to understand. You have studied, but you have to now correlate. Our whole new curriculum tells you to correlate. Okay, so everywhere we will see with the new curriculum coming into force, so they are trying always the integration and alignment. They are always, we just underwent this CISP2 training for the teachers, which says the curriculum implementation program. What does it say? That there should be integration and alignment. So why are we discussing all this? Because the same things which you have studied in physiology, the same thing you will study in medicine also. So that has to be, the thought process has to be same. They cannot be different. We cannot compartmentalize. They have to come together, and that is how you will remember them. That is how you will think in a in one in a composite manner. Understand? That is why I am telling you, please try to give your thought into it, just not memorize only. Okay, you have studied same thing you have studied in 11 12, same thing you have studied in physiology, and I am repeating, but the idea is to make you understand in a better way. Understand? So all these hemodynamic forces, and there are some plasma mediators, there are some cytokines which can give a negative impact to the endothelium and lead to endothelial injury. So we come back again, that endothelium can be injured directly, that is by some trauma, or indirectly by some forces which are already in play inside the flowing blood. Am I clear? Next. So this is the picture which has been taken from Robbins. I will not go into the details of this picture. You can look into your book. You may have a soft copy of it also. Just go through it. So endothelium has got this both the activities. It inhibits thrombosis, that is anticoagulant activity, and this is favors thrombosis, that is procoagulant activity. So you go through it, you will be able to understand. I am not going to those points one by one, it will take time. So okay, now coming to our topic proper, that is thrombosis. Thrombosis means the formation of a blood clot. Okay, thrombus is nothing but a blood clot. So thrombus means anything that thrombus means the formation of a blood clot with the components of the blood itself. Okay, a uh, solid is the solid the thrombus is a blood clot which is formed from the constituents of flowing blood, and this thrombus is definitely a solid in nature. Thrombus cannot be liquid, but thrombus leads to following things that are the effects of thrombus. But how thrombus is formed? Thrombus is formed due to three primary abnormalities in the blood. Three primary abnormalities in our body, not in the blood but in our body. These three primary abnormalities. One is the endothelial injury, second is the stasis or turbulence of blood flow, and third is the hypercoagulability of the blood. These are the three very vital factors which are important, and these are known as Warshaw's triad. You know, Rudolf Virchow is known as father of modern pathology. He was a German scientist, and he was a German doctor. In fact, not just a scientist, he was a doctor, and he coined various terminologies, and he is one of the important things in generation of thrombosis was his idea that there are three factors which are into play for a thrombus formation. Okay, so thrombus is blood clot formed from the constituents of blood, and the abnormalities leading to thrombus formation are known as Warshaw's triad. Warsaw can be pronounced as Warkau. Many people pronounce it as Warkau, but I follow this pronunciation, Warsaw. So first is the endothelial injury, second is the stasis or turbulence of blood flow, third is the hypercoagulability of blood. So we will come into this one by one. Endothelial injury. So we discussed First, the endothelium, because why endothelial injury is important. So to establish this point, we have already discussed what role does endothelium play in normal hemostasis. We have already discussed that. So now, endothelial dysfunction, as I told you, and can be induced by various factors, not only by direct injury. So these are the factors which are given there. I will give you the PDF. You can go back and read up also, and these are all given in the books. So don't worry. So even metabolic abnormalities like homocystinemia, hypercholesterolemia can lead to endothelial injury. Understand? And dysfunctional endothelial cells can produce more procoagulant factors. We have already discussed this. So they can produce more procoagulant factors and may synthesize less anticoagulant factors, eventually leading to thrombus formation. That is blood clot. Thrombus is blood clot. So clotting is favored. Okay, even if the endothelial cells have not been disrupted, there has not been any direct physical injury to the endothelium. Even these other factors, the subtle factors, can lead to formation of a blood clot within the flowing blood vessel, within a blood vessel. Okay, so this is the basis of thrombus formation. So one of the most important is the endothelial injury. Alterations in normal blood flow. So blood flow, it was there. So we know that whenever there is a disturbance in the blood flow, that can lead to, indirectly, that can lead to endothelial injury. Okay, or dysfunction. So it can be turbulence or stasis. Turbulence means increased blood flow. Stasis means slowing down of blood flow. Okay. So turbulence leads to formation of counter currents. So you see, there are some currents which are formed in a flowing water. If you see, especially you can see during after the rainy season, the heavy flowing or rivers, there are currents which are formed. Okay, these are known facts. So these currents are also formed inside our flowing blood. These currents, they may not be as evident as in a flowing river, but small amounts of currents are formed, and they also lead to local pockets of stasis. That is, the wherever the blood flow slows down, that is called stasis. So this stasis and counter currents, they are formed by the alteration of blood flow. Stasis is more important for formation of venous thrombi, that is in veins, because in artery the stasis is not so important, because in artery the blood flows with the help of the pumping of the left ventricle. Okay, so left ventricle, that is the heart pumping, is more important, and that is why stasis is not so important in case of arterial blood flow. But whereas in venous blood flow, which depends on other factors like the presence of venous valves, the presence of the contraction of the muscles, so their stasis becomes very important, and more the stasis, the more chances of blood clot. Okay, so stasis and turbulence therefore promote endothelial activation, enhancing the procoagulant activity and leukocyte adhesion. Understand? So the leukocyte adhesion, the platelet adhesion, everything is due to the injurious effect on the endothelium. Understand? And disruption of the laminar blood flow. Laminar blood flow is the smooth blood flow where the cells are in the central area and normal plasma is in the peripheral area. Okay, most of the cells, the RBCs, the they are in the central column, and in the peripheral column we see the normal plasma with the plasma proteins. They are in the peripheral area. Okay, why it is there? Because if the cells become that toward the lateral area, then they have a tendency to adhere. Okay, so if they adhere, then that will lead to clot formation. So that is not wanted. So under normal circumstances, during the laminar blood flow, there is no addition of these cells towards the endothelial cell. Now, whenever this laminar flow is disrupted, the platelets and the leukocytes, they come into the contact with the endothelium. Primarily the platelet, because platelets are important for formation of the primary hemostatic plug. We have discussed it. Okay. It also, this alteration of the normal blood flow also prevents washout and dilution of the activated clotting factors. Okay, the activated clotting factors, if there is a stasis, this activated clotting factors will be there, they will not move, so there will be more chances of clotting. It is not for turbulence, it is only for stasis. Okay. Hypercoagulability, also known as thrombophilia. Please note this term, thrombophilia. Thrombophilia you will come across again in medicine and in hematology especially. So hypercoagulability, also known as thrombophilia, occurs due to any alteration of the coagulation pathway that predisposes to thrombosis. So thrombosis, whenever any coagulation pathway, there is any alteration of the coagulation factors or alteration of any of the pathway leading to thrombosis, that is called hypercoagulability. Okay. If there is a injury, there is a formation of blood clot, that is not hypercoagulability. However, under normal flowing blood, if suddenly we see a clot has formed, we will think that there are some factors which are leading to the formation of thrombus, and one of the factors is hypercoagulability. These factors can be divided into a primary, that is genetic factor, and secondary, that is acquired factor. Okay, and the most important genetic factor is the point mutation of factor 5 gene, also known as factor 5 Leiden and prothrombin gene. Okay, so these genetic mutations are very important for the generation of hypercoagulability, that is they predisposing to thrombus formation. These are the states which are given, that is the hypercoagulable states. They can be primary, that is genetic, factor 5 mutation or factor 5 Leiden mutation, prothrombin mutation, rarer as the antithrombin 3 deficiency, protein C, protein S deficiency, and there can be some acquired deficiencies also leading to thrombosis, hypercoagulable state, that is prolonged bed rest or immobilization, myocardial infarction or atrial fibrillation, because myocardial infarction or atrial fibrillation leads to this reduced capacity of contraction, the left ventricular contraction, and if the contraction becomes slow, the arterial blood flow becomes slowed down. Okay, similarly prosthetic cardiac valves, also tissue injury, surgery, fracture, burn, cancer, these are all risk factors for coagulation, that is thrombosis. Okay, we also have a thing called DIC, that is disseminated intravascular coagulation, which is a chapter by itself, and I am not going to discuss it now. DIC is very common and also comes as either as a short note, even at times you get it as a long question, so you have to read up DIC. We will discuss it definitely in one of our classes. And we have got something known as anti-phospholipid antibody syndrome, and there are some additional risk factors, though the risk factor is low: cardiomyopathy, nephrotic syndrome, hyperestrogenic states, and smoking. Okay, so these are the factors which can lead to a hypercoagulable state. The effect of thrombus. These are the 4 important effects of thrombus. This is asked in the Viva table. So whenever we go for a viva, and if the examiner thinks he is going to ask you question on thrombus, he will tell you define thrombus. He will tell you what are the what is Warshaw's triad, or what are the factors which are responsible for thrombus formation, and finally, after discussing a bit of the each factor, they can ask you what is the fate of a thrombus. So fate of a thrombus are four: propagation, embolization, dissolution, and organization. Okay, so this first is the propagation. Propagation means the elongation of the thrombus. A thrombus is a small clot which has formed at a particular place. If it becomes elongated, becomes long, so that is known as propagation. Okay, propagation is not dislodging and going to another place. It is just the elongation of the thrombus by accumulation of additional platelets and fibrin. Please try to understand this point, because propagation is different from embolization. In embolization, the thrombi dislodges. It is detached from the original site and travels to some other site in the blood vessel, okay, and lodges to some other site. A thrombus uh, which has started, suppose, in the vein of a leg, goes and dislodges, detaches itself, and through the vein, through the inferior vena cava, and finally through the pulmonary vein, it reaches into the lungs. Okay, so that is a embolization. Okay, that is embolization. Propagation is just the elongation of thrombus with the addition of platelets and fibrin. Dissolution is a good thing. Dissolution, if it happens on its own, so there is no risk. So that, but that does not happen normally very frequently. It only happens under normal condition, when every other thing is normal. That is, when a normal clot is formed, it is dissolved by the mechanism of fibrinolysis, which is activated by tissue plasminogen activator. Okay, so dissolution is the result of fibrinolysis, and it can lead to rapid shrinkage and total disappearance of the recent thrombus. Okay, but remember, if there is a big clot and the area there is susceptible to repeat clot formation, dissolution does not normally take place. Otherwise, the incidents like cerebral thrombosis, incidents like myocardial infarction would not have occurred, isn't it? Next is organization and recanalization. Older thrombi become organized by ingrowth of endothelial cell. Organized means a thrombus has formed, and within the thrombus, endothelial cells, smooth muscle cells, and fibroblasts, they have penetrated. Why penetration is important? Because that eventually this recanalization leads to some flow of blood, not full flow of blood, some flow of blood into the surrounding area. Otherwise, the whole of that area will become devoid of blood and die. So body has its own preventive mechanism. Body has its own protective mechanism to prevent total death of the cells beyond that thrombus. So body, what does it do? It tries to recanalize. Okay, so recanalize means that the body takes up some shovel and tries to clear up the thrombus, and by that clearing up of the thrombus, by the clearing up of the thrombus, there is some flow of blood to the surrounding area. Okay, so this is a histological picture showing thrombus. This is the lumen of the artery. This is I think Barov stain for elastic tissue, and this central portion is the thrombus. This picture has been taken from Robbins, not my own picture. There are basically two types of thrombus. One is the venous thrombus, one is the arterial thrombus. We will discuss one by one, but just in brief. Venous thrombus, mostly they occur either in the superficial or deep veins of the leg, because legs are the ones which are more susceptible because of the gravitational force. The legs are the ones which are more affected. Okay, Superficial thrombus are better because they can they do not lead to disastrous complications. But deep vein thrombosis, also short formed as DVT, in the larger leg veins below or above knee are very serious because such thrombi often embolize to lungs. What I was telling you, they go travel through the veins of the leg, through the inferior vena cava, through the pulmonary vein into the lungs. Okay, that through the heart, actually through the atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary vein, and into the lung. So it travels a whole lot of area, but eventually if it lodges actually into the lung, it leads to something known as pulmonary infarction. We will come into infarction, what is infarction, etc. But pulmonary infarction is a serious condition, and this leads to dyspnea, and if it is a very large pulmonary infarction, it can even lead to death. Okay, so deep vein thrombosis are not a very good thing to happen. We have arterial and cardiac thrombosis also, and the primary cause for that is atherosclerosis. So atherosclerosis, the formation of the this cholesterol plugs within the blood vessel is the is a important cause of arterial thrombosis, because it is associated also with the loss of endothelial integrity and abnormal blood flow. Okay, so atherosclerosis is a chapter by itself. So atherosclerosis, when we discuss atherosclerosis, we will discuss it in details, but presently just remember that atherosclerosis is basically formation of some cholesterol plaques inside the lumen of the blood vessel. So that is atherosclerosis, mostly driven by the lipids, that is the cholesterol, and there are so many other factors which lead to atherosclerosis. Okay, it leads to the loss of integrity of the endothelial cell and also abnormal blood flow. So that is basically arterial and venous thrombosis. Now this thrombus can be dislodged. Embolization. So embolization, what we have seen as the fate of thrombus. So now what is embolus? It's a detached, it's a detached intravascular solid, liquid or gaseous mass. Now remember, when we were discussing thrombus, we always told that it is solid. So how come this liquid and gas come? Because embolus is not just thrombus. Embolus can be something other than thrombus also. Okay, so thrombus was just the components of blood, but embolus can be also a liquid embolus, can also be a gaseous embolus that is carried by blood to a distant site from the point of origin. And this term was also coined by Warsaw in 1848. Okay, so remember this definition of embolus: detached intravascular solid, liquid or gaseous mass that is carried by the blood to a distant site from the points of its origin. Okay, and it can lead to partial or complete obstruction of the blood flow, and the consequence of embolism is infarction. Infarction, what is infarction? Is the ischemic necrosis of the tissue distal to the site of embolism. Okay, please remember these are small definitions within another definition. Okay, so infarction, we will discuss it in detail definitely. But infarction, what is it? It's a ischemic necrosis. Ischemic, what do you mean by ischemia? Ischemia is the loss of blood flow leading to loss of oxygen supply to a particular tissue. Okay, so and ischemic, the necrosis, we have already discussed necrosis. The most important was coagulative necrosis, that was seen in case of a myocardial infarction. We have heard this term infarction. So infarction is nothing but ischemic necrosis of the tissue distal to the site of embolism. Okay, so what is the embolus? So if it is a solid, it can be a thrombus or clot. It can be liquid also, that is amniotic fluid, a fat in its liquid form. It can be gas, it's air or nitrogen, or it can be some miscellaneous substances like foreign body, parasite, tumor cells in a ball. That can be a cause of embolus. So embolus can also be sterile, it can may be infected, and we have seen embolus can origin from an artery, from heart, from vein, from a lymphatic. Okay, so these are the sources of embolus. There is a term called paradoxical embolism. What is paradoxical embolism? An embolism caused due to carriage of embolus from the venous side of the circulation to the arterial side or vice versa. That is through some atrial septal defect, through some ventricular septal defect, through some patent foramen ovale. So these can lead to paradoxical embolism. Why we are discussing this? Because uh, deep vein thrombus which originated in the vein, that is suppose it originated in the popliteal vein of the leg. Okay, so it traveled to popliteal vein, went to the inferior vena cava. Okay, so from inferior vena cava it went to right atrium. From right atrium it went to right ventricle. So in the ventricle there was a ventral septal defect. Instead of going to the pulmonary artery and lodging into the lungs, it went to suppose the left ventricle because there was a VSD. VSD is ventricular septal defect. You have read in an account. So this VSD was there, and that embolus the thrombus. So that embolus traveled from right heart, right ventricle to left ventricle. Okay, and from left ventricle, suppose uh, through the superior vena cava, sorry, aorta, it went to suppose brain. Okay, so that's an example of paradoxical embolism. Instead of staying within that particular circulation, that is the venous circulation or the arterial circulation, it crossed over and went to the other side. Okay, that is called paradoxical embolism. Please try to understand, instead of just memorizing everything, try to have an idea. Memory can be much better if you have a clear understanding of something. Okay. Now, retrograde embolism. Retrogradism means embolism which travels, that is the propagation of in a retrograde manner. Okay, the embolus is detached substance, and embolus we have seen that it can be due to a tumor also. Okay, so here you see the miscellaneous category we had foreign body, parasite, and tumor. So this example is retrograde embolism, is that a embolus normally travels with the flow of blood. Okay, so it was supposed to go from artery from one side to another site, but instead of going in the with the direction of blood, it went the reverse. Okay, so that is an example of retrograde embolism. How does it go? Because it can go in a reverse manner, in a propagated manner. Propagation. So you have heard the word propagation. Here accumulation, but here also we see this embolus propagates and goes in a reverse direction, and the prostate cancer can metastasize to the spine by this manner. Okay, that is called retrograde embolism. Pulmonary thromboembolism. Pulmonary thromboembolism, we discussed this term, and pulmonary embolism is a venous embolism leading to occlusion of the pulmonary arterial tree. Okay, and this embolism or occlusion can come from the sources. Important source is from the thrombus of the large veins of the leg, that is 95%, and thrombus can also come from the superficial veins, varicose veins, pelvic veins. Okay, so these are the sources of pulmonary thrombus. So pathogenesis, if it is large, it can lead to a saddle thrombus. Saddle thrombus is a thrombus which sits on the bifurcation of the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so pulmonary venous trunk, if it is there, the saddle thrombus obstructs, so that becomes a saddle thrombus. Multiple thrombi, multiple emboli, there can be multiple embolus. Okay, paradoxical embolism we have already discussed. So here it will be from the arterial side. If it crosses to the venous side and then lodges into the lungs, it will be pulmonary embolism, paradoxical pulmonary embolism. And the consequences can be sudden death. There is a large embolus that can lead to sudden shock and death. Acute coropulmonary means multiple small emboli have come and leading to this heart failure. Okay, leading to right ventricular failure due to the dysfunction of the lungs. Okay, because the pulmonary vein is eventually responsible for carrying of the blood to the right, left atria, isn't it? So if the pulmonary artery, which has originated from the right ventricle, if it gets lodged with multiple emboli, so then the lung will not function properly because it is receiving the blood. So if it gets blocked, so the pulmonary vein will not be able to give the blood to the right atrium, left atrium. Okay, so pulmonary embolism is the embolus which is lodging in the pulmonary artery. Okay, I think I had made a mistake before. I may have told pulmonary vein. It is not pulmonary vein, it is pulmonary artery, because from the right ventricle there will be the pulmonary artery which will come out, not pulmonary vein. So pulmonary artery, the saddle thrombus is lodges in the pulmonary artery, the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery. So that is there, and there can be pulmonary infarction. There can be the infarction means the ischemic necrosis. So in the lung also there can be lot of necrosis and hemorrhage. Resolution, of course, is a good thing if it can resolve on its own, and if there are multiple small emboli, they can lead to pulmonary hypertension and chronic coropulmonary. So acute coropulmonary and chronic coropulmonary. This coropulmonary means there is the left ventricular failure due to any cause related to lung. Okay. Systemic embolism. Systemic embolism, we had this venous embolism, that is pulmonary embolism. Now systemic embolism, that is the mostly the arterial embolism. It originates in heart, commonly in the left ventricle, following myocardial infarction and congenital heart disease, prostatic valves, leading to infarction of the lower extremity, brain, spleen, kidney, etc. So infarction, wherever the embolus will lodge, there will be infarction, there will be ischemic necrosis of the area because there will be stoppage of blood flow, lack of oxygen leading to infarction. Okay. Fat embolism. Fat embolism is a special term. It is caused due to trauma, that is fracture of long bones, laceration of the adipose tissue and burns. And fat travels as a semi-solid state. You know, fat is not a solid, it is not a liquid also, it is in a semi-solid thing. And in non-traumatic conditions like fatty liver, diabetic mellitus, pancreatitis, Even those conditions may lead to fat embolism. So fat dislodges from the site where it was, travels within the blood and lodges to some area, leading to the obstruction of the blood flow in that particular area, and the eventual outcome will be definitely ischemic necrosis. So embolism leads to ischemic necrosis, we have noted, and fat embolism does the same thing. So mechanical injury leads to the dislodgement of fat into the veins and small vessels of lung. Okay. Emulsion instability, that is the aggregates of plasma lipids due to improper emulsification, leads to also embolism of fat embolism. And toxic injury of the free fatty acids on the lung vessels leads to increased permeability. Okay, so these free fatty acids, what happens is whenever there is fat embolism, there is the plasma lipids are improper emulsification takes place, and that there is a release of free fatty acids. Free fatty acids from the lipid. The fat is what basically that mixture of triglycerides. Okay, so if there are some action of some enzymes, there is release of free fatty acids, and these free fatty acids have all negative action. That is, there is a toxic effect. So what are the fates of fate of fat embolism? They can lead to, if it is in the lungs, they can lead to dyspnea and death. Paradoxical embolism, fat embolism, can travel to brain and kidney. Okay, so if it is from the fracture of long bones, it will travel through this veins of the leg only. Okay, so the veins of the leg will take it to the inferior vena cava and eventually to the pulmonary artery into the lungs. So dyspnea and death, and paradoxical embolism into the brain and kidney. Then comes gaseous embolism. Gaseous embolism can be, I will just give me this topic. So gas embolism and a bit of infarction. I will end today with this. I will not go into edema. Okay, so please bear with me. I think the time is almost up. So gas embolism is what? The embolus which is composed totally of gas. Gas means there can be air, which is the normal air we have. There can be the gaseous embolism can be due to nitrogen also. So it can be air or it can be nitrogen, which is known as decompression sickness. So two conditions, two things. One is the normal air, one is the nitrogen. Air, how can it enter? It can be venous or in the arterial. Basically during a major operation where the artery, a big vessel is exposed to the normal air. It can be directly you see the artery has, whenever the artery becomes there is suppose an injury to the arterial wall, the artery tries to contract, the wall tries to contract by the basic mechanism of this neurohormonal substance. Okay, so this contraction, as I told you in the initial phase, whenever there is a injury, the artery tries to contract. So this contraction, during this process of contraction, the air, if it is there, may be sucked in, especially where there is lot of air. Suppose in the case of a lung, okay, in lung, in the peritoneum, or even if it is a thoracic injury where directly the artery can be exposed with the normal air. So there the air can be sucked in. Okay, and it can become an embolus. So little bit of gas will not cause, but if it is 100 ml, 150 ml, that much of air has to come inside. So that will lead to death. Little bit of air may be absorbed by its own self. Okay, if little bit of air is it goes inside the suppose the vein, it will it will dissolve on its own in the lung, and there will be no effect. But if the gas is more, that's why whenever we give intramuscular injection or intravenous injection, we always make sure that there is no air bubble inside the syringe. Okay, so also during certain procedures like in this angiography, intravenous infusion or injection, so there can be, we can inject air by iatrogenic effect, that is the effect by the hospital staff or the medical personnel. Decompression sickness or Caesar's disease, it is also, it comes as a short note. Okay, so what is the pathogenesis? Sudden decompression, high pressure to normal or normal to low pressure, leads to increased amount of gases, that is the nitrogen, oxygen and carbon dioxide, that they tend to dissolve in the blood to the high pressure area. Okay, so if there was a high pressure and the gases which are there in the normal air, okay, the gas which is maximum in the normal air is nitrogen, then is oxygen, then is carbon dioxide, they dissolve in the blood, and they, when it is rapidly brought to the normal level, they dissolve out. What happens normally is the gases, they dissolve in the blood whenever there is a high pressure, and when the pressure comes back to normal, they dissolve out. But if the process is very rapid, so the nitrogen that creates some bubbles, and these bubbles coalesce together, means they adhere together to bigger bubble. Okay, oxygen and carbon dioxide, they are normally carried by our plasma, so plasma is well versed with these gases. But nitrogen bubbles, they become a large bubble, and that is the cause of the trouble, and that is what is known as Caesar's disease or decompression sickness, that this bubble creates a embolus. The bubble itself becomes an embolus and leads to the side effects. What are the effects? If it is an acute thing, means of a sudden onset, it can obstruct smaller vessels near the joints, and if there is an obstruction, there will be ischemia. Any obstruction will lead to ischemia due to loss of oxygen supply, and that leads to pains in the joints, and the patient becomes bent. The bent of the patient is termed as bends. Okay, if this embolus, that is the air embolism caused by nitrogen, comes in the lung, okay, comes in the lung, pulmonary arteries, there is respiratory distress because it does not dissolve out on its own. So that respiratory distress leads to choking of the patient, and it is colloquially termed as chokes. So with Caesar's disease, we have bends and chokes. Okay, and if the if the nitrogen bubble, the embolus lodges into the brain, it can lead to vertigo and coma also. There is a spelling mistake, vertigo. So it can lead to even death. The coma can may lead to death also. If a large amount of brain becomes infarcted, that can lead to death, obviously. Chronic means there is avascular necrosis, there is a slow release of nitrogen bubbles. The nitrogen bubbles which have been originated, they have not dissolved out completely, they remain inside the circulation, and gradually with passage of time, they lead to avascular necrosis of the bones, some neurological symptoms due to ischemia of brain, some lung symptoms due to lung edema, chest pain, etc. And in the skin, they may produce erythema, that is redness. In the liver, they may produce lipid vacuoles, etc., etc. So these are the effects of nitrogen embolism. Okay, that is one of the examples of gaseous embolism. Coming to our last topic today, that is infarction. And what is infarction? It is nothing but A coagulative necrosis of the tissue resulting from some sort of circulatory insufficiency. Okay, so it is a necrosis, tissue necrosis, coagulative tissue necrosis due to circulatory insufficiency means there is some insufficiency in the blood flow leading to reduced oxygen supply, leading to necrosis, and that is a infarct. Okay, so there can be arterial obstruction, ischemic necrosis. There can be venous obstruction, that is also known as stagnant hypoxia. So arterial necrosis leads to pale infarct, that the organ which were supplied, the solid organs which were supplied become pale because there is no flow of blood in the arterial obstruction. The solid organs which are there are the heart, the kidney. The arterial obstruction leads to a solid area of coagulative necrosis. Okay, the large whatever area is involved is the area of coagulative necrosis. It is pale in color. It is wedge shaped. Wedge shaped. Why wedge shaped? Because at the point of origin there is the blood vessel, they try to branch out, so all the branches supplied by the particular blood vessel, that is the particular artery or the arteriole, they will be gradually infarcted or necrosed. Okay, so that is why the shape is a wedge. Wedge means a triangle kind of a thing, so it is a wedge shaped infarction. Red infarct, loose tissues like lungs, mostly due to the venous obstruction. Okay, venous obstruction lead to red infarct, arterial obstruction lead to pale infarct. So venous is the pulmonary artery, functions as a vein, as you know. So this pulmonary artery, this which is originating from the right ventricle, is whenever this area is obstructed, so there is a loose area which is obstructed, and there is blood, there is in the mesenteric vessels also there is a area which is obstructed, and there is actually stagnation of the blood. There is stagnation of the blood, and this stagnation leads to the red infarct, because the blood, the RBCs, they become lysed. Okay, the RBCs become lysed, and this lysis lead to the reddish color of that area of infarction, and that is called red infarct. Okay, cerebral infarcts. Cerebral infarcts are an example we have already discussed when we discussed necrosis. So cerebral infarcts give to something known as liquefactive necrosis. Liquefactive necrosis is also seen in the pus. Wherever there is an abscess formation, that is also an example of liquefactive necrosis. So pathogenesis of infarction is localized hyperemia or edema and hemorrhage, leads to degeneration and necrosis of the area. Okay, initially, whenever there is infarction, the body tries to prevent infarction by increasing the supply of the area through other collateral vessels. So there is some edema and hemorrhage initially, which leads to degeneration and necrosis within first 12 to 48 hours. And there is lysis of the cells, that is the red blood cells which are lysed in the lower local area, and also leading to acute inflammatory reaction. So everywhere, whenever there is a necrosis, so there is a acute inflammatory response. We have already discussed the necrosis and apoptosis. So in necrosis, there will be acute inflammatory response, and the liberation of blood pigments, that is the hemoglobin, they are liberated. If the live cells RBCs are live, the RBCs hemoglobin will be liberated. So and there will be gradually this necrosis is there, and the necrosis is eventually replaced by the fibroblast and the granulation tissue, and that scar tissue is there, which is a non-functional, which becomes non-functional for the particular purpose. Suppose if the heart muscle is necrosed and replaced by fibroblast, that does not perform the active function of the heart muscle. because heart muscle is supposed to contract and relax, and it is by the contraction it sends the blood into the destined place through the particular artery, whether be it aorta, whether be it pulmonary artery, whichever it is. So the main function of the heart is to pump blood. But if that area becomes necrosed and gradually or later on replaced by a scar or a fibrosis, so that can never serve the function of the heart muscle itself. Okay, so that becomes redundant. That scar or calcification is a complication that becomes non-functional for that particular function of that tissue. Okay, so I end my discussion with this. So we see, we have discussed today thrombosis, we have discussed embolus, and we discussed infarction. Okay, so remember, red infarct with venous thrombus, pale infarct with arterial thrombus. So with this, I end my discussion today. The next day we will be discussing edema, okay, and subsequently we will be discussing the disorders of coagulation, the disorders of uh, thrombosis, okay, the coagulation disorders we will discuss, and we will end the topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Palash. Excellent lecture as usual. Wonderful and very nicely presented. Indeed, thrombus, embolization, infarction, these are very important topic, and we need to understand this to understand the pathogenesis of various diseases. And you have explained them very nicely, especially the fate of thrombus, which is very, very important for everybody, even the undergraduates and the postgraduates. Thank you so much. Thank you then. Let's close here. Thank you so much. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.